So for today, we have verses 3, 4, 5, and 6 lined up. Normally, 3 and 4 are taken together, but I am going to take them separately because otherwise the translation becomes very long for us to discuss and comprehend. So I'll start with verse number 3. न रूपं स्येह तथोपलभ्यते नान्तो नाचादिर्न च संप्रतिष्ठा अश्वत्थमेनं सुविरूढमूलम् असङ्गशस्त्रेण दृढेन चेत्वा. So the verse number 3 translates to, we are talking of the Ashwatha tree. It says, its form is not perceived here as such, neither its end, nor origin, nor its foundation, having cut asunder this firmly rooted Ashwatha, or the giant people tree, with the strong weapon or strong axe of non-attachment. And the verse will continue, it completes in the second verse or verse number 4. But we will take this up verse by verse. Na is not, Rupam is form, Asya it's, Ihe here, Tatha as such, Uplabhyate, we are able to gain or perceive it. Na not, Ant is end, Na not, Cha and Adi is the origin, Na nor, Cha and San Pratishtha. So the foundation, the clear foundation, visible foundation. Ashwatham, of that Ashwatha or the fig tree. Enam this. Suvirud Moolam. Mool is the root. Suvirud Moolam becomes deep rooted. Asang Shastrain. So Shastra is a weapon, Sang is attachment. Asang Shastrain becomes with the weapon of non-attachment. Asang Shastrain. Drinain is strong, willed. Chitva having cut asunder. So the verse translates to, its form is not perceived here as such, neither its end nor origin, nor its foundation, having cut asunder this firmly rooted Ashwatha tree with the strong axe of non-attachment. So let's chant it together. न रूपं स्येह तथोपलभ्यते नान्तो नाचादिर्न च संप्रतिष्ठा अश्वत्थमेनं सुविरूढमूलम् असङ्गशस्त्रेण दृढेन छेत्वा. So coming back, we are discussing the tree of life, and the tree of life or the tree of flux or the tree of change metaphor. We discussed that the branches represent the world and its activities. Now, two kinds of roots were talked about in verse number 1 and 2. One was the main root, which we talked about in verse number 1, which talked about one root which goes up. So the main root represents the god, Brahman, or the nourisher. Then we talked of the secondary roots, which were in plural. So secondary represent the vasanas, our inclinations, our tendencies, which stretch below as actions binding humans in the world. What this verse is now saying is that this form is not perceived here as such. That means both these we don't see. We are not able to see Brahman, and we don't see these vasanas which keep binding us to the world, because both are beyond human perception and comprehension. So even the vasanas, what is interesting, Brahman definitely we know is beyond our perceptions, but even our own tendencies we are not able to comprehend. Brahman, we know that is the eternal, all-pervading, infinite, has no form. It has no beginning, no end, and no foundation from which it seems to arise. Interestingly, the vasanas which arise from ignorance of Brahman, because uh, we desire for things when we are ignorant of Brahman, when we feel incomplete, we feel a void. So we seek out, move out into the world to attain things. So vasanas actually arise from ignorance of that God. They also have the same qualities. So the vasanas also have no form, no beginning, nor end, and no foundation. And the branches or the world is constantly changing or is in a state of flux, which is what is being explained to us by the metaphor of the Ashwatha tree. So, this is a continuously changing scenario. And if we think about it, the origins of the world is a mystery. And both Brahman and the creation appear to have the same qualities as Brahman, or Brahman is God. So, this verse is describing that Ashwath tree, which represents Brahman and the world, has no form, no clear form, no foundation, no beginning nor end. Now, and of course, it is fed by the gunas that we read in verse number 2. Now, this is nothing new. We are putting together all that we have read so far. And I will draw your attention to chapter 7, the Gyan Vigyan Yog, and two verses I will quote, and you can look up the notes or the recordings when you have the time. Verse number 13 and 14 of chapter 7, which translate to: deluded by these three natures, composed of the three gunas, all this world does not know me well, as above them, above the creation, and immutable. Next verse says, certainly this divine Maya of mind, made of gunas, is difficult to cross over. Those who seek me alone cross over this illusion, Maya. So, this is what we had read in chapter 7. Here in the metaphor, the Maya is actually the sprouts or the buds are symbolizing the sense objects. And these have the tendency or the potential to develop into branches. So when we are comparing the buds, if you cut the tree at a particular point, you will notice that a lot of sprouts occur at that place. So if you cut a branch, when you're pruning the tree, you will find a number of sprouts coming out, more than one definitely, right? So all of them have the potential to convert into a branch. So where you chopped one branch, now you have the scenario where you could have possibly 4 or 5 branches. Sense objects behave in a similar manner. They have the potential to develop into further desires. And once we have a desire, we will act accordingly. So once I chop off a desire or a sense object, or my contemplation on a sense object prematurely, that means the vasana has not gone, it's not satiated, it's not sublimated. I'm just trying to suppress it. More will grow. So, just like that, tree, Ashwatha tree, or any normal tree also. So, when the see what happens when the desire arises, either it's fulfilled, once fulfilled, more generate. So, a powerful man wants to have more power, a rich man wants more riches, a greedy man, I mean, okay, a beautiful man or a well built man wants more better build. All this leads to greed. So, it's consistently greed. So, this is when the desire that we entertain is fulfilled. When the desire is obstructed or is not fulfilled, it causes anger, which fogs our discrimination, our intellect, and makes us act against the righteous or the dharmic action, which is what? Nothing but the ladder of fall that we covered as far back as chapter 2, verses 62 and 63, which said, a man musing on objects develops attachment for them. From attachment arises desire, from desire arises anger, and from anger arises delusion. From delusion, confusion of memory, from confusion of memory, loss of intellect, and from loss of intellect, he perishes. Perishing here means that you go against what is dharma, what is right. So that was a ladder of fall, which we had discussed right at the beginning when we started the Bhagwad Gita. Will again repeat the ladder of fall. Attachment gives rise to the necessary desires. If met, more desires are born. If not met, leads to anger, which leads to delusion, loss of memory, loss of intellect, and we lead ourselves to our own destruction. There's a lot of cross referencing in this particular verse because it's nothing but what we have been reading so far. It's all being now summarized, consolidated for us. The theory in detail has been given in the previous chapters. So I referenced chapter 7, I'm referencing chapter 2, and then I'm also now referencing chapter 3, which was the Karma Yoga chapter, how the ignorant people behave. They act because they're acting compulsively based on the desire. So they act obsessively with attachment, binding themselves to the field of activity. So a sports person to the sport, a businessman to the business, a swami to the ashram, always thinking of my occupation, my family, my wife, my child, so it's all profession and family, trying to fulfill egocentric desires and selfish desires. So, this will result in personal profit and benefits, which will accumulate, help us in accumulating more and more comforts and pleasures. And so, these are the sprouts, you see, which the branches which are going into the world in the Ashwatha tree. So, there is no higher ideal for such a person of attaining God. And the person does not understand that attachment and desire are killers. Both are things which we should be not having. So, or we should be actually doing away with. So, coming back to the verse, what Krishna is saying, to raise this attachment, this involvement with the world, with the strong acts of non attachment. Please appreciate, it does not mean that you don't function in the world. It means that you don't get involved, you don't get attached to what's happening. If my neighbor said this, or my boss said this, my maid said this, it's fine. The world will continue in the way it is programmed to function, or and a human being will function based on the gunas, the content. So let us not get caught up in all that is happening around us. We should continue to function in the spirit of service and sacrifice, all those chapters 3, 4, and 5, actually, so that we start developing a non attachment to the world and its mundanity. This will help us focus on divinity, because once we remove the attachment to the world, our faculties are available, our intellect is available for us to contemplate on the higher. And this brings us back to the practices of Karma Yoga at the level of the body, Bhakti Yoga at the level of mind, and the Gyan Yoga at the level of the intellect. All these practices, which we have been reading, chapter 2 onwards, they help us in our own purification. At the sense level, we must check the indulgence of our senses and pull them from the world, from the objects of the world. And our mind must be attuned to think of our fellow beings and develop a feeling of love and affection for all. And we must start identifying with the oneness, which is the substratum of everything. And then what should we do is covered in the next verse, verse number 4. Then we should think of that Paramatman. So let's take up verse number 4. Tata padam tat parimagartavyam yasmin gata na nivartanti bhuya तमेव चाद्यं पुरुषं प्रपद्ये यतः प्रवृत्ति प्रसृता पुराणी. Then that goal should be sought, where having gone, none returns again. I seek refuge in that primeval Purush, or the Supreme Being, from which streamed forth all activity or all energy since time immemorial. So let's take this up word by word. Tataha, then. Then meaning after having removed, cutting asunder that tree with the strong acts of non-attachment. Then. So then, tata is then, padam, that goal. Padam is goal, tat is that. Parimargatavyam should be sought or where we should go. Yasmin, wherein, gataha, gone. Na, not, nivartanti, returns or moves in a cycle that you go and come back. So, nivartanti means return. Bhuya, again. Tam, that. Ev, even. Cha, and. Adhyam, the original, the primeval. Purusha is that supreme being, Paramatman. Prapadye, seek refuge. I seek refuge. Yataha, wherefore. Pravriti, activity. Prasrita, comes out. Purani, ancient. So then that goal should be sought, where having gone, none returns again. I seek refuge in that primeval Purush, supreme being, from which streamed forth all activity or energy since time immemorial. So let's chant together. Tatah tata padam tat parimargitavyam yasmin gata na nivartanti bhuyah तमेव चाद्यं पुरुषं प्रपद्ये यतः प्रवृत्ति प्रसृता पुराणी. So, having cut down that Ashwatha tree or the tree of life, tree of change, tree of flux, with the strong acts of non attachment, then in that state, the supreme goal should be sought exclusively. You know, it's a path which has to be where the goal is only one. You cannot have more than one goal. And what is the goal? Seek and search the highest. Now, when all the attachment has been removed, all our faculties are available for us to contemplate on that highest being, Purusha, God. And once we reach that highest, we never return to the mundane existence. This is what the verse is saying. Where having gone, none returns again. Again, this is something that we have already covered. Your reference is, attention is drawn to chapter 8, the Akshar Brahma Yoga, the yoga of imperishable Brahman. And the verses that you can revise are 24, 25, and 26, where we had talked about the path of return and non-return. And I will quote verse number 24 of chapter 8 said, fire, light, daytime, the bright fortnight, the 6 months of the northern part of the sun, their departing, the knowers of Brahman go to Brahman. Verse 25 of the same chapter, Smoke nighttime, dark fortnight, the 6 months of the southern part of the sun, there obtaining the lunar light, the yogi returns. And verse number 26 kind of summed up both these bright and dark parts of the world are verily deemed eternal. By one, the person goes not to return, by the other, the person returns again. So this was already done, and I will again recap that part, because when we are talking about in this verse, having gone, none returns, we should know what we are talking about. So in our scriptures, we compare the human life to the path of the sun, or the earth in its path around the sun. But normally, because we are the reference point, we think that the sun is moving actually. So, or we talk like that. So in the see, the movement of the earth around the sun has two parts. In the northern hemisphere, which is called the Uttarayan, the sun moves northward, and this is the period between the winter solstice and the summer solstice. So solstice is when the day and night are of equal length. So that is 21st of September to 21st of March. And the second part is in this, when the sun is in the southern hemisphere, which is called the Dakshinayan, the sun moves southward, and this is the period between the summer solstice and the winter solstice. So you would be familiar with these terms. I think most of us are familiar. So Uttarayan is associated with the northern movement of the sun and expanding days. Sun is considered the nourisher. So it is considered superior to be Dakshinayan, the days of decreasing length, okay, which we are currently in. Now, if you these verses which I quoted for you, the set of words are signifying the two parts: Agni, Jyoti, daytime, the bright fortnight, and the northern passage of the sun. They refer to the Uttarayan. And the second set of words, smoke, night, dark fortnight, southern passage, they refer to the Dakshinayan. So the our scriptures, as I mentioned, they connect the two parts of the sun to the parts of life available to the human beings. So in the movement of the earth around the sun, those parts are pretty much fixed. But we as human beings in our life have the choice of the two parts. Now, Dakshinayan is what? Where we follow our religious, Vedic dharma. We do what is dharmic, what is righteous, and we are ordinary. It refers to ordinary people like you and me. So it consists of these two activities, like you do yajnas for the environment, taking care of the environment, and doing good, public good, for like charity, building hospitals, schools, etc. So these kind of deeds. So these are the isht karm and the apurt karm. So what is happening is, when we do these type of actions, it guarantees us a happier life in future, because it's following the law of karma. But because one is desirous of a progeny and other worldly pleasures, that means we are wanting, though we still have vasanas remaining, so we continue on the worldly track. So it ensures rebirth. Or in short, good deeds will imply sukh, happiness in our next life. But because we desire progeny and have not been able to sublimate our vasanas, maybe generated new ones, we will be born again. So this is the path of return. Uttarayan, on the other hand, was the higher route. Such people follow a life of renunciation, weaning themselves away from worldly desires, both mentally and physically, through tapa, which is physical austerities, brahmacharya, mental austerities, shraddha is having faith in whatever one is learning, because the path is not visible, as even this verse is saying that that form is not visible. So having faith in what we are learning from our teachers, what we are reading in our scriptures, and vidya. knowledge, that is essential for this path. So a person traveling on this path is alone and does not have really very many role models. The only way to stick on this path is to understand the difference between what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false, and the distinction between matter and soul, which is what we covered in chapter 13. Kshetra, Kshetragya, Vibhag Yoga. So, Kshetra, the field, Kshetragya, knower of the field, both of which appear as one. They, when we look at a person, they all, or when we look at ourselves, even they appear to be one, they appear to be fused, but we have to peel off that layer. So, this is the way to move on that path. So, such are the people who are searchers, and they actually are only looking for that Paramatman. And once they reach that goal of the soul, one is established in itself and attains moksha. That is, we are liberated from these many cycles of birth and death of the individual Jivatma as well as of the universe, which means of the creation, the Srishti and the Pralaya cycles, or the creation, the dissolution at the macrocosmic level. It's like we have just woken up from the dream and now are not affected by what is happening in the layers below us in our dreaming state. So the verse is referring to that substratum as the supreme being, which is the cause of all activity from time immemorial, from the beginning of time, actually from eternity. So that is what this verse is saying. Moving on to verse number 5, I will chant. निर्माण मोहाजित संग दोषा अध्यात्मनेत्या विनिवृत्त कामा द्वन्द्वैर्विमुक्ता सुख दुःख संगे गच्छन्ते मूढा पदम् अव्ययम् ततः. So the verse translates to free from pride and delusion, conquering the evils of attachment, dwelling constantly in the self, free from desires, liberated from the pairs of opposites like joy and sorrow, the undeluded reach the goal eternal. So let's take this up word by word. Nirman moha. So man is ego or pride. Moha is attachment. So nirman moha becomes free from pride and delusion or attachment. Jit sang dosha. So sang is attachment. Dosh is fault. Jit is to win. So jit sang dosha becomes those who have won or who have conquered the evils of attachment. Adhyatma Nitya. So Adhyatma is the spiritual journey or this our spirituality content. Nitya is always. So Adhyatma Nitya can be translated to those ever rooted in self. Vinivritta Kama, which is translated to with desires completely gone. Dvander Vimukta. So Dvander is the pair of opposites. Mukti is freedom. Dvandver Vimukta, well liberated from the pairs of opposites. Sukh Dukha Sange, this is an example. One pair of opposite is presented before us as joy and sorrow. Gachanti, go. Amood. Mood is an ignorant person. Amood is one who is not ignorant or non-deluded, undeluded. Padam is that goal. Avyayam is eternal. Tat, that. So, free from pride and delusion, conquering the evils of attachment, dwelling constantly in the self, free from desires, liberated from the pairs of opposites like joy and sorrow, the undeluded reach the goal eternal. Let's chant it together. निर्माण मोहाजित संग दोषा अध्यात्मनेत्याविनिवृत्तकामा द्वन्द्वैर्विमुक्ता सुखदुःखसङ्गे गच्छन्तया पदं अव्ययं ततः. So, this verse is now explaining the state of the seeker having reached that highest level. So, the previous two verses, verse number 3 and 4, talked about removing the attachment and in that state contemplating on the highest goal. Now, before we try to understand this, uh, we must also evaluate that why do we act? Why do we act? We feel any action. See, you are sitting peacefully somewhere, and suddenly this feeling of thirst arises in you. So you act. If water is kept near you, you will take a sip and then continue maybe sitting. Or if water is not near you, you will go to the water cooler and fill water for yourself, right? So, what is happening is that we feel a gap, a sense of void or incompleteness, or a search for something, or a trishna. And to fill this void, we act. Or we now this is in case of water, a physical requirement. Very often we have imaginary voids and we move into the world to fill these voids. So the chronology of action is simple. You have a desire for something or a vasana, which so the thirst arises. Okay, so you have the thought of thirst, which wants you water, which brings you to act for water, getting water so that you can drink it. So this is how we move out into the world. Now, not in understanding Brahman because it's beyond our comprehension, and the world is right in front of us because all our senses are outward going. So we continue to pitch our goals in the world. It's easier. It's something that we see. So you see, let's say, a sari and you want to buy it. So our the moment I see something, I see a beautiful sari, our thoughts start flowing towards that object or to that being. This is desire. Now, howsoever we are centered, we could be physically centered. So we are looking at the body level, beauty, and physical activities, and so on, so forth. That's what we'll do. If I'm more emotional, I will be seeking emotional help. Maybe I'll be providing emotional help. If I'm intellectual, I'll be thinking of reading, evaluating, analyzing, and so on and so forth. So, howsoever we are centered, in that directions our efforts go. The only thing is that the desires at whatever level, body, mind, and intellect, from the external world or towards the external world, arise in us endlessly. And you may recollect when we and you can read the chapters, the 3, 4, and 5, the nature of desire, their wombs of sorrow, and they're limited in the sense once you smoke a cigarette, you derive pleasure only for the while that you're smoking that cigarette or watching a movie. It could be anything. So for if you've gone for a movie for 2 hours and enjoying the movie, fine, but it is finite. It has a beginning and an end. Also, they're insatiable. That means they're never satisfied. You watch a movie, you want to watch another movie. You smoke a cigarette, you want another cigarette. You buy a sari, after some time, you want another sari. So they're insatiable and all consuming because once we are caught up in that desire, we will not rest till that time that desire is fulfilled. So I want a championship or to win championship, I will ensure that I do that. So for that time, till the time I win the championship, I'm consumed by winning the championship. Once I have won the championship, I'm worried about retaining the championship or winning the next championship. So it's not satiated and it's all consuming any desire. So all desires consume us, our mind, body, and intellect. And interestingly, as the desires multiply, so does our stress and agitation. So this is a continuous cycle. So past action leading to present vasanas, those kind of desires, present action, and while acting in the present, we generate vasanas for the future. So this is, and we come back to the cycle. So action becomes the cause and vasana becomes the effect. Then vasana becomes the cause and action becomes the effect. So this is a continuous cycle, like the seed in the tree and the chicken and the egg. And as we mentioned few verses back, it is ignorance of that Brahman that the desires arise, desires or dislikes, they're in the same category, which create vasanas, which are the cause for our birth. So if we remove attachment, what happens to us? We attain freedom and purification. How do we do this? How do we attain this freedom and purification? Which is what this verse is saying. Nirman moha, freedom from ego and ignorance. Ignorance that the world of objects gives us permanent happiness. Jit sang dosha, that means freedom from all the evils that arise from attachment. So when we become non-attached, uh, the previous verse number 3, all the evils that arise from attachment automatically go. And how to maintain this non-attachment? Through adhyatma nitya, which means constantly, consistently being in that practice which helps in the removal of delusion, pride, and egocentric desires, and maintains that level. See, it's very easy to come down. So you get up early in the morning and you give yourself, winters are coming, so you don't feel like getting up early. So if you were getting up at 6:30, now you gradually it becomes 7, 7:30. So it's very easy to slip down. So doing spiritual practices consistently, vinivrit the kama is egocentric desires and selfish actions. So we become free. But once we are non-attached, we are free from egocentric desires. We don't have that, and therefore we don't act selfishly. All that chapter 3 was karma yoga, chapter 4 was gyan karma sannyas yoga, or yoga of renunciation of action and wisdom, and chapter number 5 was karma sannyas yoga, when that means freedom from action, where action does not taint us or bind us, right? So we act in a spirit of service and sacrifice. And when we say that it does not bind us, that means we are sublimating our desires. The vasanas are getting exhausted. So that is what we had discussed in chapter 5. Dandver vimukta, that means free from the pairs of opposites. So when you are in that state, you're not tossed around by the world. Oh, someone praised me, someone did not praise me. It's hot, it's cold. Honor, dishonor, profit, loss, all this. These are all the pairs of opposites. So when we fulfill all these 5 conditions that we discussed, nirman moha, jit sanga dosha, adhyatma nitya, always in doing our practices, spiritual practices, vinivritta kama, that means free from egocentric desires and selfish actions, dvandver mukta, which is a consequence of non-attachment. So we are free from the pairs of opposites. So then what happens? We are non-deluded. We are without a void. We are complete, whole, perfect, paripurna, as our scriptures say. These are the qualities which are of none other than the God himself, God. So we are attaining now those qualities which are we know God has, or that is what we are told. So we as a Jivatma or the soul share the characteristics that are ascribed to God. And that is our natural state. which is paripurn, which is complete, whole, perfect, ever blissful. It is an association with desires and attachment that we start connecting with these limited qualities of incompleteness. So, through non attachment, the connection of the Jivatma with Paramatma is re-established. We were always there. We moved out into the world and we lost our connection. That same story that you read in the Bible, the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. You see, you can revise, it's the same thing actually. So, the moment you move out into the world, then you're caught up. But our natural state is that of completeness. We revel in that absolute peace, bliss, and happiness, which is our natural state. And then all the God's characteristics, peacefulness, blissfulness, justice, oneness, everything is ours, and we attain that state, the highest state. Moving on to the last verse for the day, verse number 6. न तद्भास्यते सूर्यो न शशाङ्को न पावकः यद्गत्वा न निवर्तन्ते तद्धाम परमं मम. The sun illumines not, nor moon, nor fire, to which having gone, they return not. That is my supreme abode. So let's take this up word by word. Na throughout is not. So na tat, that, bhasyate, illumines, surya, sun, na shashank, moon, na pavak, fire, yat, to which, gatva, having gone, na nivartante, returns, tat, that, dham, home, abode, paramam, supreme, mam, my. So the sun illumines not, nor moon, nor fire, to which having gone, they return not. That is my supreme abode. So let's chant together. न तद्भास्यते सूर्यो न शशाङ्को न पावकः यद्गत्वा न निवर्तन्ते न तद्धाम परमं मम. So simple verse. The verse is saying that neither the sun, moon, nor fire illuminate or illumine God. So, see, the five phenomenal sources of light are the sun, the moon, the stars, the lightning, and fire. So, that is what is being covered by the three that are mentioned here. So, sun and stars are the source of direct light. Moon is the source of indirect light, and fire and lightning are generated light. Light which is generated through physical or atmospheric phenomena. These are the sources which illumine. And what do they illumine actually? Only the world of objects. They do not illumine that Brahman. So, illumination, when we talk about in this verse, symbolizes all the form of consciousness gained at the physical, mental, and intellectual levels. And only light is mentioned here, but other senses are implied here. Just as in the previous verse, we had mentioned joy and sorrow only as an example of the pairs of opposite, but it implied everything, profit, loss, etc., etc. So similarly here, when we talk of light, it implies all other senses, are sense of taste, hearing, sound, etc. So all other senses are implied. All these give us knowledge or consciousness with respect to the world only. So these are conditioned consciousness or relative consciousness which pertains only to the world. Brahman is beyond this relative consciousness. So that is what the verse is saying, that they do not illumine me, Brahman, that which is the absolute consciousness, which is beyond this relative consciousness. And that is the place where the souls reach once they attain God, and that is God's supreme abode. Having reached there, there is no return. This we covered in detail in earlier, one of the earlier verses today. So, this is what this verse is saying. And these first 6 verses of the chapter cover the macrocosmic expression of Brahman, our goal. And with that, we conclude today's session.